Hello friends and army. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through the entire process of me painting this portrait of V from BTS using watercolors, gouache, and paint markers. So to begin, I started with the sketch using Procreate on my iPad. The reason I like to do the sketch digitally is because I have a lot of flexibility when it comes to rearranging the items, experimenting with what elements I want to incorporate, and it allows me to rework the sketch as much as I like, which was very important in this case because I wanted to make sure I did my best to get his likeness. For these portraits, the idea was I wanted them to look like Polaroids with cute stickers applied to them that included their name and icons that suited each member. For V, for his name tag, I wanted something that had a vintage vibe to it since that seems to be part of his personal style in my opinion. And so I got some inspiration from like circus signs and things like that. And you'll see here that I initially wanted to include a bear as one of the stickers in reference to his solo song Winter Bear, but I just couldn't settle on a style that fit. And then eventually I ended up switching it out to be a saxophone, and ultimately I think it ended up suiting the rest of the elements a lot better anyways. Then, after I've settled on the sketch, I print it out so that I can transfer it onto the watercolor paper. Here you can see me using a light pad so that I can see through the paper to trace the sketch using a colored pencil. Also, don't worry, I use this printer paper for another sketch on the other side, and then I do save these pieces of paper for troubleshooting my printer as well, and then eventually I end up recycling it after I've used it to its utmost potential. So that's something I wanted to address for those who might think that I'm wasting paper by printing out these sketches. And then after I've transferred the sketch onto the watercolor paper, I tape it down to a masonite board with some masking tape to prepare for painting. So I do apologize that we've jumped forward a little bit in this painting process. I didn't realize at first that I did not hit record on my camera. So anyways, if you're familiar with my usual watercolor painting process, you might know that I typically start from very light and work my way to dark. However, during the process of painting all of these BTS portraits, V actually being the last portrait of this set, I thought that I'd experiment with how I approach painting them. So here you can see that I'm actually starting with the shadow areas alternating between purple and red. And the way that I get them to kind of blend in with each other is that I have both of the paint mixtures ready to go on my palette, and then I alternate between them while the paint is still wet, and so that allows the two colors to sort of blend and bleed into each other. With these portraits, I purposely chose photo references that I felt like had a fairly clear light source, so that made the shadows much more distinct. This, I think, really helps with giving all of the portraits a sense of cohesion with each other, even though the reference photos that I use are all from different sources. Some of them being from photo shoots, some of them from being stage shots, just all sorts of different places. But I think that because I chose each photo reference for the purpose of feeling like there was a distinct shadow and distinct light area, I think that helps keep them looking like a set. And plus, I find that it also just makes them look more interesting when there's a distinct contrast between light and dark in the portrait. That being said, I wasn't overly concerned about the colors being quote-unquote realistic. I more so wanted the portraits to feel bright and colorful, and that's just sort of part of my personal style. And so you can see that I'm going in with fairly saturated yellows, reds, and purples. And this is a good example of sort of pushing through those quote-unquote ugly stages, because throughout this entire process, there are definitely moments where even I thought that it looked really ugly and I was concerned about whether or not I was going to pull through. But I've said this many times in my previous portrait process videos that sometimes you just have to see it through to the end and hope for the best. I think that a lot of people get easily discouraged when they reach stages in the process that look, unappealing, but you just have to push through, and usually it ends up being okay. Not always, unfortunately, but you just got to keep pushing through. And then in a similar manner to the way that I was approaching the skin, even though V has quite dark hair in this photo that I was using, I wanted to have some variety for interest purposes, and again, just to make the portrait feel really fun and colorful. So I went ahead and used a mixture of purples and browns to make up that first layer of his hair color. When I work on any painting, I personally prefer to jump around from element to element. One of the reasons for that is because it gives each area time to dry in between layers. So while I was painting the hair, it gave some time for the first layers of the paint on the skin to totally dry. Mind you, I do often use a hairdryer as well to speed up the process because I'm kind of impatient, and sometimes, depending on my environment, the drying time can take a little longer. But allowing the paint to totally dry in between layers is very important because this ensures that all of the work you did doesn't lift or become disturbed as you continue to add more layers on top of it. I will say though, watercolor is a water-soluble medium, and so even if the layer has dried, you do have to be careful about the way that you brush onto the surface, because if you're a little bit too rough, you can still disturb the layers underneath. Plus, I also find that if you overwork an area too much while it's wet, you can also damage the paper that way too. So yes, layering is important, but you have to make sure that the layers are drying in between. And another thing about watercolors is that it dries lighter and less saturated. So not only does layering more paint add depth, but it also adds saturation as well. And so when you want the colors to be fairly vibrant, and that's the case for my personal style, it's important not to mix too many colors with each other because that will result in muddy color mixtures. So for the watercolor portion of this portrait, I mainly stuck to 3 colors: red, yellow, and purple. And I just sort of fiddled around with the different ratios of the mixtures and the layering. And here at this point in the portrait here, you can see that I'm going in very bold with these colors. And I was definitely worried. I was worried that I had messed it up and I was going a little bit too bold. But again, it looks much crazier when it's wet, and then as it dries, it does kind of lose a little bit of its saturation. And again, I wanted these portraits to be really, really colorful. So I just had to trust my gut and soldier on through these kind of weird looking stages. Then, slowly but surely, I made my way into working on defining his facial features, still using that same purple paint so that it feels harmonious with the skin tone. The downside of working with a traditional media as opposed to digitally is that sometimes throughout the process you do start to lose parts of the original sketch, as well with watercolors in particular. It's hard to lighten an area after the paint has been laid down. So it is kind of an unforgiving medium in that sense. So you'll see that I actually try to use a colored pencil a little bit here and there around his nose in particular, because I feel like that's one of the main distinctive features of V and really contributes to trying to get his likeness. Ultimately, I will admit that I feel like my original digital sketch captured his likeness more than the final painting, but unfortunately that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes, and ultimately I did really try my best on all these portraits, and I hope that, for those of you who are really big fans of BTS are not too disappointed. I again, really did try my best here. Then after I add some layers of paint to his hair and to his clothes, I go ahead and start painting in the background while I let those layers dry. And so for these portraits, I decided to base the background colors off of their stage microphone colors. So for V, I went with a green. The initial green that I had laid down, I felt like was too earthy, like was too on the yellow side. And in my eyes, I felt like against the very purple/blue toned hair and clothes, it just didn't really go well together. So I remixed the green into a more blue shaded green, and I felt like that suited the illustration much better. That being said, I did feel like there was still some kind of disconnect between the green background and the portraits. So when I finished the background, I actually went ahead and added some green to his clothing. That way it just tied them in a little bit better together. Because of course the green eyes do help tie the background to the portrait. I felt like adding in the green on the jacket helped it even more. And so, like I had been mentioning throughout the process of this video, I really wanted these portraits to feel really playful and fun. So at this point, I use a fluorescent pink gouache diluted with a lot of water to glaze over the portrait to really make it pop. And this is something that I feel like is only possible with this particular fluorescent gouache because it is a little bit more opaque. And so it's just a little bit more vibrant than I think any watercolor that I have. But the reason I'm able to glaze it this way is because I mixed it with tons of water. And this is the reason why when I get asked, do I prefer watercolor or gouache? I do really love both mediums, but I will say that gouache does have a little bit more flexibility. And then from there, I continue adding in more details to the hair, and I'm just finessing all of the different areas of this piece, including the necklace, and just adding more layers to the jacket and fleshing out all of the features. And here I am using a white acrylic paint marker to add those really bright highlights to certain parts of his face as well as his eyes. And then I go in again with that watered down fluorescent pink gouache and add it to his hair and his jacket just so that it ties everything all together. Working on these BTS portraits was both fun and stressful at the same time. For those of you who stuck around for the last bit of my recent Q&A video, or for those of you who actively follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I only recently fell down the BTS and K-pop rabbit hole, mainly this year, and I have quickly become a little bit obsessed. I've been having so much fun consuming all the various BTS media, and so it felt fitting that I finally contributed something in the form of some illustrations. And the reason why I say it was partially stressful working on these was because I know how passionate the fan base can be, and I personally don't illustrate real people very often, so the pressure of capturing each member's likeness, but still feeling true to my own art style, and overall just trying to do them justice, not only for the fan base but for myself, was a little nerve-wracking. At this point, all the portraits have been posted on my Instagram, and for the most part, I've gotten a lot of positive and warm comments. It was seriously so cute seeing how excited people were about the fact that I am not only BTS fan now, but also making artwork of them too. But as a disclaimer, before anyone decides to leave a comment about it, I recognize that these portraits are far from perfect, and I know that some might be more successful than others, but just know that I did my absolute best, and I created each and every one of these portraits with equal amounts of love and adoration. So with that out of the way and the process of this just about being done, I am happy to show you the rest of the boys as well as give a little bit of insight of how I approached each portrait. All right, and that is the finished portrait. I feel like I really like how the different colors are happening in his hair here. And I really like the little tag that I did for his name. And yeah, I chose to do the little snowflakes because a lot of his solo songs like Winter Bear or Snowflower, winter themed, and then I know in interviews he had mentioned that he had wanted to be a saxophonist, which I think is so cute, so that's why I added that in there. And then let's look at the other boys. So if you follow me on Instagram, you will have already seen them. So here's RM. Of course, I had to paint in his little dimples, and I wanted to include a bicycle in reference to his solo song that he released recently. I really like how the kind of colors I did in the denim jacket there. And this was actually the first portrait that I did of this series. Then we have Suga. I really like the little banner. I like having multiple colors there. And then, of course, I included a little nod to his solo album there, D2. Then we have Jin. I really had a lot of fun with this kind of vibe since he, you know, is worldwide handsome. So that's why I did the little crown, and I wanted to go for some kind of regal vibe. And then of course I did a little moon in reference to his solo song. Then we've got J-Hope. I definitely knew immediately that I needed to include a sun and a rainbow in his because he is a embodiment of sunshine, truly. I really like how the hair turned out in this one and included a little airplane in reference to his solo song. And then we have Jimin. I absolutely loved this color palette. I think that the pink and the yellow work really, really good together. And I did this little bust in reference to his photo shoot that he did for his solo song Filter. And I'm just obsessed with the eye makeup in this one. And the way that the shadow looks here is really satisfying. And last but not least, we've got JK, Jungkookie. I wanted to include this in a nod to the fact that he directed one of their music videos. And then of course this is in reference to his solo song My Time. And yeah, I had a lot of fun adding in his little tattoos there. I think he has more now, but these were the most important, I think, to include. And I'm happy to say, due to many requests, I went ahead and got all of the portraits turned into postcards and stickers, which are now available in my online shop. You can buy them as a set at a discounted price, or you can buy them individually. The link to my shop will be listed in the description down below. Anyways, that concludes today's video. I hope that you enjoyed seeing the process of this portrait come together. And for my fellow BTS fans, who is your bias and what is your favorite BTS music video? I'd love to discuss in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. I'm wishing you an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I hopefully will see you in the next one. Bye!